From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Cata Gonzalez, and this is From the South. We begin in Venezuela, where despite mainstream media reporting of unrest in Caracas, it's business as usual. The streets of the city are calm as Venezuelans carry out their daily tasks, despite fake news that violent acts are...
What he's already said publicly in his letter, which is basically his concern regarding the crisis in the country and the impact that it is having with the Venezuelan people. He said the United Nations is ready to increase its activities in Venezuela in the areas of humanitarian assistance and development. However, he said that for this, the United Nations needs the consent and the cooperation of the government. The Secretary General again underscored that recognizing governments is not for the Secretariat and for member states. And he noted that his relations with member states, he respects decisions taken in particular by the General Assembly and the Security Council. And he reiterated in his letter the availability of his good offices to help find a political solution to the crisis.
And a UN human rights expert has rejected the U.S. sanctions against Venezuela. Idris Jassairi warns that the measures can lead to starvation and medical shortages. He says the sanctions are adding to the crisis and are a violation of international law. Meanwhile, President Nicolás Maduro met with new diplomatic representatives appointed by their governments and received their credentials in Caracas. Ambassadors and representatives of Suriname, Mozambique, Benin, Dominica, Zambia and Laos met with the president, the foreign minister Arreaza, and other officials at the Miraflores Palace. Maduro says the Bolivarian diplomacy for peace is strengthening. And Venezuela's ambassador to South Africa says it's comforting to have allies in Africa in the wake of political tensions fueled by the United States and its allies. Our correspondent Matuba Matlaji has more.
The political tensions in Venezuela have gone beyond the country's borders, with nations expressing support for President Nicolás Maduro. The support comes against a wave of disapproval from the United States and its allies. Venezuela's foreign mission in South Africa says there's an attempted coup in Venezuela.
This is a coup d'etat. This is a coup d'etat in development in Venezuela in this moment, with United States in front of the coup d'etat. And with the leader of the opposition, in this moment Juan Guaidó, of the United States. And unfortunately, some countries in Latin America follow them.
The head of the Venezuela's mission in South Africa says attempts by the United States to destabilize Latin America is a pattern that reminds her of other regions where the U.S. got involved in domestic politics.
This was the same in Iraq, was the same in Libya, in all the countries that when U.S. intervened. It's the same plan.
When asked why the United States was keen on removing the current government in Venezuela, she says the reasons are no secret.
The response is simple: our natural resources. Our natural resources and the political difference between Trump and Nicolás Maduro. But also is the same difference with the Commander Chavez. The problem is we are a democratic government working to socialism, and we have a lot of natural resources.
Ambassador Moreno Marida lamented that mainstream media did not cover the Venezuela story objectively, and this, she says, causes even more tensions.
The media only show the information the information of the opposition, and it's not true. And yesterday I spoke with one journalist here, and I asked him why you didn't show the images in Venezuela with the people in support of our President Nicolás Maduro.
Venezuela's government believes it's the overwhelming sanctions from the supporters of self-proclaimed President Juan Guaidó that are worsening the situation. Matuba Matlachi, Telesur, Pretoria.
Venezuelan authorities have rejected the European Parliament's recognition of the opposition leader Guaidó as interim president. 429 European lawmakers voted in favor of the measure and 104 against. The Parliament is now urging all EU governments to follow suit. On Wednesday, the president of the National Constituent Assembly, Diosdado Cabello, rejected the EU's support of a coup.
But how irresponsible of the European Union? They're committed to invasion and bombing. They don't care about their own citizens who live here. There are many who live here who arrived in the year 1950 and onward. They have their roots and businesses here, but they don't care about them. Today, when they make calls to invade Venezuela, it doesn't matter where the Spaniards are living. It doesn't matter to them if an international coalition comes to drop bombs over Caracas. In many neighborhoods of Caracas, you will find families which are descendants of Italians, Spaniards, Portuguese, and Germans.
On Thursday, oil workers in Venezuela led what they called a great anti-imperialist march to demand respect for self-determination. Our correspondent Luis Tavera reports from Caracas.
Speaking in one voice, workers of the state on PDVSA made clear their anti-imperialist position. They called attention of U.S. plans to dismantle the Venezuelan constitution.
We are a sovereign people, and we decide that Nicolás Maduro will be our president, because sovereignty resides in the people.
Protesters say the embargo imposed by Donald Trump's government against the oil subsidiary Citgo reveals their neoliberal intentions. The new U.S. sanctions will block $7 billion in Venezuelan goods and $11 billion in oil exports for the year 2019.
Today we can see how the U.S. aims to snatch our wealth. Today the world sees how the USA has lowered its mask, and we can see that the whole world supports the Venezuelan people.
The Venezuelan government continues to raise its voice to denounce the attempted coup d'etat that is being carried out in the nation. President Nicolás Maduro has urged dialogue and respect for the constitution and has denounced the U.S. intentions to appropriate Venezuela's wealth. Venezuelans say they want to live in peace and stop the intervention.
And speaking at this rally, the president of PDVSA said that OPEC's Secretary General Mohamed Barkindo sent his words of support for the country's oil industry.
This year, Venezuela will hold the presidency of the OPEC conference and the Forum of Gas Exporting Countries. We have received all the support of the Secretary General of OPEC, Barkindo, and his word of support for the Venezuelan oil industry. Thanks, Barkindo, for so much support. Thanks to OPEC.
Supporters of President Maduro have held demonstrations in the Catalan capital, Barcelona. Protesters gathered outside the European Union headquarters in the city after the body recognized the opposition leader Guaidó and his unconstitutional claim to the presidency. Representative of the pro-Catalan Independence Party, CUP, Maria Sirvent, said that the people of Venezuela have already voted and that there must be respect for that result.
We are here to condemn all international interference against the sovereignty of the people of Venezuela. We understand that it is a question of democratic legitimacy and that the people have decided and therefore must respect the sovereignty of the people.
Pacifist groups and trade unions organized an emergency rally in London to show their support and solidarity with the Venezuelan government. Hundreds of people gathered at the headquarters of the National Education Union to reject Guaidó's claim to be interim president and the U.S. intervention in Venezuela.
These aren't the things that we hear on the BBC, and they aren't the things that we hear from the politicians who are currently in the government of our country. And so they are completely wrong, and we need, therefore, to stand with people of good faith and the progressive left to ensure that our voices are heard in saying that our government's position is unacceptable, as is the US government's, as is what's going on in Venezuela, and we support Nicolás Maduro.
This week, Mexico and Uruguay announced that they will jointly host an international conference to advocate for dialogue in Venezuela. The conference will be held in Uruguay's capital, Montevideo, on February 7th. Representatives of countries and international organizations with a neutral position on Venezuela will also join. The president of the Mercosur bloc has also called for a meeting with member states to be held after the conference. He described Uruguay and Mexico's move as a very important initiative in support of dialogue in Venezuela. Bolivian President Evo Morales has tweeted praise for both countries, saying he's joining their initiative to hold this international conference that will push for a peaceful settlement in Venezuela. U.S. Congresswoman...
But the United States should not be in the business of intervening, of picking who should lead their country, and we certainly should not be threatening military action. Venezuela poses no threat to the United States. Congress has not authorized the United States to go to war in Venezuela, and there's no justification for our country to violate the sovereignty of the Venezuelan people.
Vamos, vamos. That was U.S. Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. Now we'll take a short break, but don't go away.
An occasion to enjoy the cultural diversity that defines our South American essence. Come along to find out the story behind these personalities, traditions, and artistic expressions that unite us as a whole. Real Lives, Friday, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. St. Lucia's government easily defeated the no-confidence motion that the opposition brought against the Prime Minister. Our correspondent Alison Kentish has the details.
St. Lucia's Prime Minister Alan Chasney has survived a no-confidence vote against him in the country's parliament. After an over 10-hour-long debate on the motion that went into the wee hours of Wednesday morning, 11 government MPs voted in support of their leader, while 6 opposition MPs supported the motion. In the end, the ruling United Workers' Party used its majority in the House to hand Chasney the victory.
The motion before the House now is that the question be now put. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. No. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
While the motion was defeated, leader of the opposition Philip J. Pierre told reporters that it had achieved its goal. He says the party knew that it would not win the war, but won the battle of getting the public to listen, as he used the parliamentary platform to outline the reasons why the opposition believes that Chasney has failed as a leader.
The public of St. Lucia saw that ministers and members of the United Workers' Party who said awful things about the Prime Minister in private and at his back came to Parliament and in a show of so-called togetherness voted for him. We have no issue with that, but our point is made. A lot of the lies that were said yesterday, we can tell you that they were not true, like the issue relating to the minister and his wife being involved in the business. I have the documents which I can make available to you, and I leave it to you to prove whether it's right or wrong. I think that our struggle continues.
Meanwhile, Chasney's team has argued that he has been a good leader who has made inroads in developing education and infrastructure.
They will not only lose the vote, but they will lose this vote, Mr. Speaker, comprehensively and commandingly, Mr. Speaker, as all members on this side will be giving the Prime Minister their tacit support.
Supporters of the ruling United Workers' Party and the opposition St. Lucia Labour Party converged outside the House of Assembly to support their MPs. The no-confidence motion was filed by the leader of the opposition in November 2018. The opposition has vowed to move into stage 2 of its mission, which includes a national public meeting on January 31st in the heart of St. Lucia's capital city, Castries. Alison Kentish, Telesur, St. Lucia.
In other news, in Colombia, human rights defenders are continuing to denounce the systematic murder of social leaders. Our correspondent in Bogota, Tatiana Portela, has more.
The murders of social and community leaders continue in Colombia. This week, 2 more leaders were killed. Delio Corpus Gietio, who was a trade unionist and part of the Campesino Guard, was killed on the streets of Santa Barbara in the department of Cauca. Also murdered was Jose Jair Orozco, who was developing many housing projects for vulnerable communities in the north of the Valley of Cauca. Since President Iván Duque took power, at least 102 social leaders have been murdered, and 460 have been murdered since the peace agreement. On Wednesday, Duque's government called on the National Commission for Security Guarantees to protect the leaders and to disarm the criminal groups killing these people. However, during a news conference Thursday, it was announced that the functions of the commission will be relegated to the Action Plan for Prevention and Protection, or PAO. But this was rejected by social organizations because they say that the PAO does not have the structural tools that were outlined in the peace agreement. They also say it delegitimizes the National Commission for Security Guarantees. Another issue is that the PAO will be under the control of a retired soldier who has allegedly been linked to extrajudicial executions, crimes that took the lives of more than 10,000 young people in Colombia.
That was our correspondent Tatiana Portela from Colombia. Now to El Salvador. Ahead of Sunday's elections, the Electoral Court has been distributing electoral packages in the country's 14 regions. Let's take a look at the preparations in this report from our correspondent Ernesto Ábalos.
The 19 municipalities of San Salvador are receiving the electoral material, which will be distributed at the polling stations 24 hours before the elections next February 3rd. On Saturday, we started the municipalities with the second stage of the collection center of the polling stations. The third stage will be on the night of Sunday, February 3rd, the collection of these packages to bring them back to each municipal electoral board. And on Monday, February 4th, and at 7 in the morning, we begin to receive here to all the municipalities the packages in return together with the respective copies. The transfer of the electoral packages are under the supervision of the Attorney General Office, the Electoral Monitoring Board, and the Human Rights Office. The custody of the security of the electoral material is in charge of the National Civil Police. The operation is going to be distributed for the dough to the different polling stations that are in El Salvador in the different municipalities in each to put a distribution route. We will set security of 4 police elements to ensure that we'll reach its destination. The Supreme Electoral Tribunal claims that they are prepared at 100% of the presidential voting day. After a test process and drills, it's only necessary to refine certain difficulties in the transmission of the data. We have to fix some bugs that has been detected with some details still that they are mentioning, which are trying to correct yet the system, which basically is given by the issue of the transmission from the points that are located by the company that has been contracted. The electoral silence started this Thursday as mandated by Electoral Code. Another provision that must be fulfilled is a dry law, which prohibits the sale and consumption of alcoholic beverage 1 day before, during and the day after the elections.
In Brazil, controversy continues to surround the Minister of Women, Family and Human Rights. The local newspaper Folha de São Paulo has questioned Damares Alves' background, which is supposed to include a master's in education and law. In response, Alves said that her education comes from the Bible. An indigenous tribe has also accused Alves of illegally taking a girl from the community 15 years ago. Alves was heavily criticized for saying that what is normal is that boys dress in blue and girls dress in pink. Also in Brazil, on Thursday, thousands of indigenous people and their supporters took to the streets in 15 cities across the country. Our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Brian Mir, was there.
January 31st was marked by protests for Brazilian indigenous rights in cities across Brazil, as people took to the streets to protest a new wave of aggression and denial of rights by the far right-wing government of Jair Bolsonaro.
We are here, united, as various different peoples and ethnic groups from different regions in an attempt to resist what this government is trying to do.
In São Paulo, a crowd gathered under the MASP Modern Art Museum on Paulista Avenue to protest President Bolsonaro's new policies, including his decree that passed jurisdiction over indigenous reservations to the Ministry of Agriculture, which is dominated by the same ranchers and agribusiness interests that have been stealing indigenous people's lands for centuries.
Peace. We want peace. We want our place where we can live without these people who want to massacre Indian and to take away our peace. We want nothing more than this. We don't want a lot of things in life. We want our place. All we are asking for is peace and our place to live.
At a time when hate speech, violence, and land grabs against indigenous people are increasing in Brazil, thousands of people came out in an act of solidarity with the indigenous population.
We are here today to show that wherever there is an Indian who is still breathing, our culture will not die. So we are here today in the struggle, resisting like always.
Brian Mir, Telesur, São Paulo.
Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari has intensified his campaign for a second term as the general elections draw near. On Thursday, he defended the results of his first term at a political rally in Kano in front of tens of thousands of supporters. He promised to restore security and boost the country's economy if re-elected. General elections will be held on February 16. An Indian Air Force jet crashed in the southern city of Bengaluru on Friday. It happened immediately after takeoff, killing both pilots. Immediately known. The World Health Organization said it is optimistic about the progress in containing the Ebola virus outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The WHO's regional director for Africa says that she is optimistic despite challenges such as population mobility. She emphasized the need for preparedness both in the DRC and surrounding countries that are also at risk.
I feel optimistic. I'm very clear that we need to continue this work. We need to make sure that in the places where we've made progress, we build on this progress and we don't go backwards. And we are being very, very conscious of the fact that we need to invest to improve the preparedness in both in the DRC areas that are at highest at risk and most importantly in the surrounding countries that are at risk.
A South African artist is using art and photography to reflect on her African heritage and to stress the importance of land reappropriation. The recent show of Sitembili Msesane that was held in the United Kingdom has strong themes on South Africa and Zimbabwean history. She emphasizes the importance of correcting colonial land distribution imbalances in both countries.
This body of work kind of surfaces in a time where South Africa is having conversations around land reform and changing the constitution to allow for land reform. And so, in part, this body of work speaks about this ushering in of the ancestral or spiritual realm, speaking to issues of land, because the land is where the bones of our ancestors, our rituals and our traditions are.
We have more stories coming up. We'll be back.
The life is full of moments. Moments of fight. Moments of hope. Moments that transcend. Moments that you can live in. Telesur documentaries. Sundays, only on Telesur.
The ruling world order has always subjugated the masses. But who are the actors behind every move? What are their real interests? We analyze every move on Critical Move. Weekdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. UK Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn is speaking out, saying that the future of Venezuela is a matter for Venezuelans. Corbyn says that the UK Foreign Secretary's call for additional sanctions on Venezuela is wrong. He said, "We oppose outside interference in Venezuela from the US or anywhere else," and said that a dialogue and negotiated settlement is needed to overcome the crisis. In the U.S., leaders of the Catholic Church in Texas have identified around 300 priests and others accused of sexually abusing children. Names were posted online by the state's 15 Catholic dioceses. Some listed priests accused of abuse go back to the 1940s. This comes as U.S. state and federal authorities are investigating the church's handling of decades of allegations of sexual misconduct by priests.
While we have gone to great lengths to ensure that this list is exhaustive, we know that there could be more victims who have not reported their abuse. If we receive any further credible allegations, this list, which is not closed, will be adjusted to reflect the latest information. I encourage them to come forward and to report to law enforcement agencies.
The U.S. says that starting Saturday will suspend compliance with a 1987 weapons treaty with Russia. The Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty bans either side from stationing short and intermediate range land-based missiles in Europe. The U.S. alleges a new Russian cruise missile violates the pact. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the U.S. will formally withdraw in 6 months if Moscow does not end its alleged violation. Russia denies those claims and says it regrets Washington's decision.
Under the INF Treaty, effective February.
And with that, we come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories from our website at telesurenglish.net. For our viewers in Africa, we are on Starsat channel 461 in South Africa and 539 in Nigeria, and we're on social media as well. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.